Welcome, everybody. My name is Mike Dovish, Executive Director of Nutrition Capital Network. Today's call is Trends in the Business of Nutrition Science, and I'm joined here by my colleagues Tom Arts and Grant Ferrier, as well as Naja Guthrie from KGK Synergize and Todd Harrison of Venable. Before I hand it over to Grant Ferrier, I just wanted to make mention that everybody's line will be muted through the entirety of the call, but feel free to send any questions you have through the chat function if you are online, or you can send me an email directly at ndovish@nutritioncapital.com. So with that, I'll turn it over to Grant.
All right, thank you, Mike, and welcome. This is part of our ongoing series of educational and interactive web calls that we've conducted at NCN since we founded the business in 2007. The objective today is really to talk about clinical trials, advancing science into claims and product-ready claims, and the issues surrounding that. As mentioned, Naja Guthrie from KGK Synergize is a leading clinical research organization. She has a presentation. You've been sent that ahead of time, which she won't go through in detail slide by slide, but you can refer to it as we go through it as sort of the sustenance of our discussion when we get into it. Todd Harrison from Venable LLP, one of the leading law firms in the dietary supplement and nutrition industry, will add commentary about a legal perspective as well as business perspective on making claims and using that in the market. Tom and I will do a brief introduction now about first about NCN and some background on us, and then leading into some comments Tom will make about the state of where the supplement and nutrition industry is, following on to one of the major meetings he chaired earlier. So on our first slide, again, you can see everybody's names and the title. Our mission of NCN is really to connect investors and strategic partners, acquirers with both product companies as well as ingredient science companies, and facilitate the investment process through introductions and networking and relationships in the industry. We have 4 investor meetings, as we'll showed and scheduled on the slide number 5. On the slide number 3, you can see what we call our network or our ecosystem. So over the last, since 2007, we've had 25 investor meetings, and with anywhere from 80 to 130 attendee participants, and anywhere from 12 to 23 presenting companies who present their business plans in 10-minute intervals, and then the second half of the meeting is usually arranged for one-on-one meetings of the interested investors with partners who have presented. And again, part of that process is a selection and screening from a vast array of companies. You can see we've had over 2,200 applicants to NCN investor meetings each cycle, usually about 80 to 100 for the mostly consumer-facing companies that will present at our upcoming meeting November 3rd and 4th in San Francisco. And then in Supply Side West, ahead of that, on October 6th, we have our meeting there where 12 to 15 presenting companies will be picked from a group of about 30, 35 applicants that will go through and screen, and our screening committee will participate in that as well as mentor those companies who present. And again, more background on our company. You can see the different categories that we focused on. Again, principally natural organic foods, functional foods, dietary supplements, and the ingredients and technologies behind them. And companies are typically past proof of concept as a consumer product and looking to scale, looking to grow, and looking for investment capital and or strategic partnership. And our participants, as we'll show later, are both our cornerstone investors that are strategic acquirers or investors through their venturing groups from packaged goods companies or private equity firms or smaller venture firms or wealthy individuals from the industry or interested in the industry who want to acquire, invest, and partner with earlier stage companies. So our calendar, which I'm not completely jumping through, but in slide 5 of 11 that we sent ahead, we do have a free seminar at Expo East that leads into what's called the Pitch Slam. That's coming up on September 16th, so a little more than 2 weeks off. That's just an educational session, so we're not screening and qualifying companies for that meeting, but we do have a networking and educational event for an hour that leads into the Pitch Slam, which we do in partnership with New Hope. So that's coming up at East. And then our 2 main meetings, again on slide 5, October 6th, as I mentioned, at the day before supply side. We do have an hour and a half of education featuring both Todd and Najla and a couple other presenters there. And then leading into an alumni panel of former presenters, and then our new 12 to 14 companies will after that. And then again, the fall meeting in San Francisco is listed as well. So we invite your participation on both sides of the plate. A couple of slides that we presented some of our success stories, both at the consumer end as well as the ingredient end. Our PDF seems to have lost a couple of the headers, but I think you can get the idea of some of the successes we've had. All in all, of the over 400 presenters, 57% have received some kind of transaction or financing out of our meetings, either specifically or in unrelated connections. And then our last slide before I ask Tom to give us 2 or 3 minutes on his perspective on the industry lists our sponsors. 2 of them appear today, Venable and KGK. And you can see our other sponsors, Leadership Capital in Executive Search, Christie and Company in Marketing Communications, Sprim in Life Science Strategy and Innovation, Specialty Nutrition Group in Commercialization, Metabrand in Product Formulation, and New Hope as a longtime partner, and Silverwood is our investment banking partner. So all of those are supporters of the organization, and you can hear from them in this and various forms elsewhere as we continue our mission. So with that, the last 3 slides in our presentation were cut down from a longer presentation that Tom Arts has done. For those of you who don't know, Tom chairs the NBJ Summit. Nutrition Business Journal is a business he and I founded in 1996, and the Summit is one of the vestiges of that business, is still owned and operated by Penton New Hope. And the Summit this year, of course, addressed some of the pressing issues in the nutrition or supplement industry. So Tom was going to give us a brief snapshot of the big picture of what came out of that for the challenges of the supplement industry. So are you ready, Tom?
I'm ready.
Okay, go.
How much time?
4.5 minutes.
Okay. I assume everybody can hear me. Thanks for the floor, Grant. I think looking forward to hearing the rest of this presentation from our presenters. So as Grant said, we did the summit the 3rd week of July, July 23rd. I think many of you on the call might have been there. But this summary is for those of you that it might not have been, or also to share with you some of the results from the pollster that we did at the event. We have an electronic audience participation technology where people can actually chime in, and rather than try to present the all the overviews that were given, Grant, I'm happy to provide the state of the industry presentation from the summit as well, if you want to send that to any of the participants who made the call today. So I'll send that out. So some very brief numbers. The supplement industry grew 5.1% in 2014 to arrive at $336.7 billion. That was down from 7.5% in 2013. So the industry still is growing, but not as robustly as it has in past years. Most of that is due to some negative media and press, which we all know about. 2 key product categories have been affected by that, multis and omega-3s, over the last 18 to 24 months. We particularly had a big year with the negative news out of New York with the Attorney General, which many of you are familiar with, and that did probably not help growth, and I still think that's not even over yet. So we had some challenges. So the summit theme was really about how do we move the bar forward on making some changes in the industry, and we had several opportunities to get together with CEOs sort of behind the scenes, and we had a CEO dinner, and we put a position paper forward to suggest some changes that might occur in the industry as a straw man, and we got some comments back on that. I'm also happy to provide that to anybody that's interested, and that's sort of taken some shape about where the industry should go. What I thought I would do with the two, Grant gave me 2 slides. It's kind of hard to summarize 2.5 or 3 days of the summit, but I thought I'd give you some highlights from the pollster technology from the audience, and also add some color commentary myself. So if you look at the 2 slides left, here's some statistics, and we had about 220 to 250 people responding to this. We had about 350 people in the room. So, about 220 responses. So that's what this represents, and this is actual voting from those folks in the room, mostly CEOs. So 67% believe the industry is still strong, but it's weakened over the last several years. And 40% of those say that the greatest challenge is eroding consumer trust. So there was a lot of talk about how do we regain consumer trust and what can we do. Shockingly, 82% believe consumer confidence in safety and quality is lower than last year, and 67% of the 220 people we polled in the audience believe that DSHEA should probably change in a minor or major way. 29% believe DSHEA is the right law and needs to be enforced. If I gave that same poll the previous year, I think it would have been probably reverse in those numbers. Probably would have been about a third that said DSHEA should change. So I think a lot of people are thinking we need to make some changes in the regulation, but we need to be very careful how we do it. By far the most surprising feedback from the audience, Grant, was that 66 to 80% of the CEOs support some kind of pre-market notification. So we did the actual polling and came up with 66% in the first day. And by the last day, I did a show of hands in the audience of about 300 people, and about 80% or 80-85% of the CEOs said that they would support some kind of notification, product notification, not pre-market approval, in order to enhance consumer trust if it was done correctly. So we talked about having a model like when you get your license, you have to actually get a code, and we talked about having some kind of code, and we talked about sort of the whole regulations going back to the raw material providers, which I know Todd Harrison's a big champion of, and that those are the kinds of things that everybody was supportive of, and I think we saw some real movement in the leadership of the industry around those issues. There was also some talk about self-regulation, and it was kind of put on the table whether we could self-regulate it as an industry, and 76% of CEOs were either doubtful or not sure if the industry is capable of self-regulation. 48% were doubtful. So that's it on sort of the big industry issues, and that's for sort of the big takeaways from the summit. Some of the market trends that we asked about were, what's going on, what's going to improve the industry. It was all about transparency. We thought a lot of CEOs thought that transparency would be the key issue going forward, and that we need to elicit trust with consumers by being transparent all the way back to the raw material value chain. Robert Craven from Food State gave a fantastic presentation on what he's doing around transparency. If you'd like a copy of that, I will be happy to send it to you. But it was very interesting. They're actually putting up cameras in their fields where they grow the herbs and showing consumers how the products are made all the way back through the system. So transparency equals increased trust, and increased trust equals enhanced consumer demand, and that was sort of the theme. And then we had a big panel on personalized wellness again, and 85% of CEOs think that personalized wellness, diagnostic, and personalized nutrition will have a moderate or significant impact on the nutrition industry going forward over the next few years. And that's it. And beyond that, I'd say that even though the industry is still hurting in some areas, and we need to definitely improve consumer trust, there were some highlights of growth. Sports supplements are still strong and growing strong. Whole food supplements are doing very, very well. And herbal products, remarkably, are doing well, even though they're still under some scrutiny based on the New York Attorney General. So in general, there was a positive note at the end that we still have a strong industry, and I think the leadership is really starting to take a hold of trying to make some significant changes before the changes are made for us. And that's it. Thank you, Grant.
All right, thanks, Tom. And before we turn it over to Najla to go through the clinical science claims, Todd, your take, I know you were involved at the summit and obviously at a high level within the industry about how to respond to essentially this consumer erosion issue and FDA's role and so forth. What's your kind of take on where we go and what's the most likely scenario for what will happen within the industry and then also within the regulatory bodies at the federal level?
Well, I think within the industry, I think you're going to see more and more companies trying to take control of their own supply chain. I think that's probably one of the biggest issues that you have within the industry today is that they don't have control of their supply chain. I think that the Attorney General testing, putting aside whether the DNA was correctly done and should have been done in the first place, it highlighted the biggest issue within the industry, and that is there is no control over the supply chain. Go back to Reagan and say what he said was trust but verify. Well, the problem was the industry was trusting but was certainly not verifying, and I think that the AG's actions back in March woke up the industry that they needed to verify. As far as FDA goes, I think that FDA probably does not want to do anything. It probably does not want to bring the suppliers under the GMPs. They will probably continue to believe that manufacturers and private label distributors will ensure that their suppliers are under Part 111. I think that's a mistake. I think that and I'm not a fan of regulation, so for me to say it's a mistake is a big thing for me to even admit. But I don't think FDA wants to do that. I think the overall is that the erosion in consumer confidence really has to go with the fact that people don't believe what they're reading. They don't believe the labels anymore. They don't believe that these products do what they say they do. And I think that really is the problem, and that's why it was probably a good segue now, Grant, to Najla, because really, if we're going to get consumer acceptance of our products, we're going to need to show that our products actually work. And I think that's where you're seeing the greatest erosion in consumer confidence.
Yeah, good, thanks. That's a good introduction. And obviously, if they don't believe the labels, they do seem to be believing what they read in the newspaper, right? So
they do.
82%. So I think the issue of control, right? Controlling the supply chain, controlling the message, and I know from discussions at the summit too, and efforts in the past that we've participated in, can the industry collectively, through all of its voices and bodies, have more control over this message and not always be in response mode? And that continues to be a big challenge, but I don't think it's a challenge that can be surmounted without better products and better science. So again, what we think is critically important is better claims and then better structured scientific development in order to make claims that consumers can understand and regulators can uphold. So again, the topic today of that continuum, how do you develop science, how do you test it, how do you get it into something practical? And Najla has been very generous to send ahead this a 20-slide presentation, which again we don't have time in the next 40 minutes to go through in detail, but I think we will go through at the beginning and make some points and observations. So again, it's my pleasure to introduce Najla Guthrie from KGK Synergize. So Najla, why don't you give us a short version through your presentation, and then we can make questions as they go from the audience that Mike can field on his system.
Absolutely. Thank you, Grant. So I'll just touch on the nuts and bolts of designing a clinical trial that best reflects the claims clients want to make for their product. There's obviously specific challenges for doing trials in our industry, as well as some thoughts on the future of clinical research and dietary supplements. So we do see a positive relationship between published clinical studies and successful sale of products. However, we continue to see the negative media that you both have referred to, and our industry being very reactive rather than proactive, and which has really eroded consumer confidence. So the consumer doesn't trust us. They look at the label, they don't believe what's in the label, they don't believe that the products do what they're supposed to do, and rightfully so in some cases. So what are we going to do to to change that. So if we're going to bring credibility to the dietary supplement industry, we must design and conduct clinical studies with scientific integrity. This has to be our mission as an industry. So, you know, as a sponsor, as a client, as a company, you have to prove that your product is safe and efficacious, and that burden of proof lies firmly with you. So I'm going to go through what you should consider when you're designing a clinical study for a claim. So first,
this is now slide 6 on your presentation. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So to conduct a robust clinical trial, you should consider 3 items. You need to clarify the claim, and this is something you can weigh in on, Todd, because the client, we encourage our clients always to start with their claim and to start talking to the regulatory attorney about the claim they're looking to make on their product right at the outset, because in order for us to design the best study that's going to give your product the best chance at success, we want to be able to address what you're going to say about your product on that label. You also need to know where you're going to sell your product, and that impacts how we design your trial. If you're going to sell your product in the U.S., we want to make sure that we design your study in a healthy population so you don't cross into the disease category. You want to make sure that your target population and the duration of the study are appropriate for your product claim. If you need to select suitable endpoints, it's very important to make sure that the endpoints you choose aren't in the disease category and can support structure function claims. And you need to select a suitable design for your claim. So is this an efficacy trial you're looking to do? Is it a bioavailability trial? Are you looking to do a pilot study to begin with to look at some trends, or a properly powered study? And all of that impacts, the type of design. I don't know if you want to jump in here, Todd, and talk about claims.
I will. These 3 are very important points, and it also highlights some of the issues that companies face with the laws in the United States with DSHEA that's in place. Oftentimes clients will be looking at studies and clinical studies, and they will want to make claims, but they don't design the study correctly to make that claim. So it's really important to understand what you think your product does and what you want to be able to say about it. And not just from a scientific perspective, but dumb it down to a 4th grade level, how you want to communicate that message to the consumer. Because you could have a perfectly reasonable study, but when the marketer takes it to a PhD level, to a 4th grade level, the claim becomes misleading. And that's hard to explain to clients at times, that study doesn't support that claim. So you really need to understand from a very basic level what you want to say to the consumer so you can communicate that information to Najla's group, so they can make sure they're designing the appropriate study. The appropriate endpoints are extremely important. Are you looking at the right endpoints? Is this a structure function study, or is this a disease study, which becomes problematic in the United States? Because if I want to do a blood pressure study and I do it 120/80, you're not going to get statistical significance. So you're now trying to start slicing and dicing what should be considered a disease and what should not. And now we get into the category, well, is 139/90, 89 a disease or not for blood pressure? Is 142, which is a little bit over the what we'd consider high normal, is that really a disease? And it doesn't help any that in the United States, the FDA thinks everything is a disease these days. But you have to design your study to show efficacy. And the real hang-up, too, is from the Federal Trade Commission side. So the FDA is kind of bound by the fact that structure function claims are structure function claims and not disease claims. The FTC is not so bound. And the FTC can look at the implied meaning of any claim and point to the fact, well, if you're saying you help promote normal blood sugar levels, well, that really means nothing but to people who at least are, at a minimum, have metabolic syndrome. And so they may very well think that a study on normal individuals is not sufficient enough to substantiate the overall marketing message of the product. So it gets very difficult. It's why you really do need to sit down with your regulatory counsel and with your contract research organization to come up with the best study and the best method, and whether you should conduct that study in the United States or in Canada or somewhere else.
So, and summarize too, you're saying you've got to know ahead of time what you want to say, but obviously what you can say is important too, and why you need legal advice on what will be allowable to say, and then ideally structure the trial to do that.
Correct.
That's
correct.
correct.
And then let me ask one question before you go on, Najla. So when you say robust, and obviously speaking on behalf of some of the listeners here today, robust meaning roughly, how many patients and roughly how much cost allocation for a typical ballpark?
That's, that differs, Grant, on the study. What robust means is that it's a properly designed and conducted clinical study. And the numbers per group will depend on the statistical calculation that we do in advance. So we would look at an effect size that you expect to see with your product over and above placebo. And we would look in the literature if you don't have anything already on your product, if you don't have a small pilot study already done or another trial done. We'll look in the literature at similar trials and similar effects, and we will do a statistical calculation to power the study large enough in order to be able to see those differences. And that's what we recommend usually to our clients when they come to us. The first thing we recommend is that understand what claim you're looking to make. Make sure you've talked to your regulatory counsel about that claim. And once you come to that conclusion, then we can sit down and design the trial to address that claim for your product.
But generally, that's going to be at least 50 patients or 50 healthy population, or more than that, a couple hundred. Or again, I know I don't want to pin you into a corner on it.
I mean, it can range anywhere from 50 to 300, 400 for in this study. Now, if it's a bioavailability absorption study, it can be 20 subjects. It can be 15 to 20 subjects. So it depends on the type of trial that it is. Also, if it's an efficacy study, yes, usually I would say minimum 50. And then higher.
Yeah,
Hi, this is Mike Dovish chiming in. I had a question that just came in, and why would someone choose Canada over the U.S. or vice versa to do their study?
The reason, from a legal perspective, you choose Canada over the U.S. is whether whether FDA would consider you need an IND or not. And so, if you're looking, let's say, your products for blood pressure. Doing, like I said, a study at 120/80 is not going to do you any good in the United States. Probably even 130/85 is not going to do you any good to conduct in the United States. You really probably need to get people who are on the high level of normal, or really at type 1 hypertension, just a little bit over 140 to 145, and that where doctors are generally going to manage you on diet and exercise rather than give you a drug. You're not going to be able to do that study in the United States without getting an investigational new drug application through FDA. So that's why I would recommend that if you really want to do a blood pressure study, you can get a broader patient population out of Canada than you can in the United States. And our diets are very similar. You're not going to have the same issues that you may have if you did that study over in India, as far as the type of patient population you're looking at.
But likely the outcome of a successful study there, the claim made in a Canadian-based study, would be understandable by your fourth grade customer here in the United States related to blood pressure.
The silliness of Duché is that if I make a claim, help support healthy blood pressure, who's going to buy that product, Grant?
Yeah, well, it's
somebody who has probably low, either pre-hypertensive or probably somewhere between 140 and 150, which would be those who would not be on the drug in the first place if they're just starting to be hypertensive. So, as I said, the silliness of Duché is that we play word games, but the reality is consumers who are buying that product are people who are already either close to that disease condition or just over that disease condition.
Okay. All right. Najla, what about the geographic issue? Obviously, you're based in Canada, but also have operations in the United States. So one question, Canada, U.S. Second, what about India? What about other places with established medical communities, but are they transferable to claims on North American products?
Between Canada and the U.S., the population is very similar. So you're still looking at a North American population. The difference between Canada and the U.S., as Todd mentioned, is we can look at disease populations here without having to get an IND, whereas in the U.S., you can't look at that without getting an IND. However, we can do the same. We can do studies in healthy populations here as well. The only difference in Canada is that all of our protocols have to be submitted and approved by Health Canada, which is the equivalent of your FDA. So it's a higher standard and a higher level of rigor that your protocol goes through before it's approved. And that only adds, about 6 weeks to the approval process for a better scrutinized study than in the U.S. In the U.S., the only approvals you need to get if it's in a healthy population is the ethics board, which we also have to get here. So from that point of view, we have operations we have clinical sites both in Canada and in 2 locations in the U.S., so we're able to do it at all 3 or only in Canada or only in the U.S. To answer your question about India or some of the other markets, there are some issues with that from my point of view. One of the main issues is that the population differences, the diet differences, the genetic differences also that with these type of trials. So if you're doing a study on weight loss, for example, the diet in India is very different than a North American diet. If you're doing a study on cholesterol or a lot of these endpoints are affected by diet and exercise and lifestyle, those lifestyles are very different than ours here. Also, it's harder to get the quality of research that and you have to make sure you know who you're working with there. I'm not going to say you can't get quality research there. Of course you can, but for it to be transferable to here, you really have to make sure that who you're working with is working to the same standards that you're working with here in North America. So most of the time what I see from our clients when they've done a study in India or China or some of the other countries and they're looking to market their product in North America, most of the time they have to redo the studies. But they can use that study as a basis, as the first trial and as a basis to build on to do the second study in North America.
Okay, good. Why don't you go through your hierarchy on slide 7 kind of introduces slide 8 and give us some characterization of, like you're saying, basic test studies versus the gold standard as you were talking about.
Right. So, when you're looking to do a clinical study, you should, go through these with your CRO. You should make sure that, what's the intended use of your product, what's the target population. We already went through that. From there, the claim can be identified, and then you can look at the outcomes that would support this claim. So, for example, if we wanted to say if the claim was maintains healthy gut function, perhaps we can choose bowel transit time as our outcome. So appropriate study design would be here a parallel efficacy study and not a crossover design. If you want to look at absorption as an example for a claim, then you'd be looking at the serum concentration of that investigational product and or its metabolites. So bioavailability study and the appropriate design for this would be crossover, not parallel. So the hierarchy going on to that slide, there's many different study designs, each providing different levels of evidence. And the hierarchy in this pyramid refers to the different levels of evidence, with the weakest being at the bottom, which is historical and anecdotal evidence. And with the most the gold standard being your randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial. As you move up the pyramid, there's different levels in there. So you've got in vitro and in vivo research, which is in vitro being in the test tube, in vivo being animal studies that you would do, translational editorials and opinions, and that could be at any level because it takes into, these are editorials that are written about products, and they take into consideration historical evidence as well as in vitro, in vivo, or whatever is already out there on the product. Case report would be a single case of the product. Case-controlled observational studies would be also case-controlled in certain settings in clinics or after the fact, looking at observational studies of what happened with that product. Randomized controlled trials then is your next, and then the double-blind placebo-controlled is the gold standard. And so why is that the gold standard? That's the gold standard because researchers and clinicians across disciplines consider that the gold standard because it minimizes bias and controls for confounding factors. This offers the strongest evidence of causal relationship between your product and the study endpoint, and therefore your claim. So designing good randomized controlled trials to prove efficacy can be challenging for our products in our industry. I can go through a couple here. So the ideal study for efficacy would be a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled parallel study where you would go through a screening period. You're screening the subjects for the inclusion-exclusion criteria that we would have in that particular protocol. Then you may want to have a running period. That's usually a good idea in some designs. So, for example, for weight loss or cholesterol type of studies or hypertension type of studies, they're a good idea because they usually have a diet component to them, and you want to make sure that everybody has the same instructions and is starting from the same baseline. So you're minimizing variability in your baseline, which is going to showcase the effect that your product may have over and above placebo. A lot of the studies we recommend to have a run-in period with. The next design would be a crossover design, and that usually we recommend for bioavailability or absorption studies. And in this type of design, you also have a screening period. You may have a run-in. You have the same subjects going through both treatments. So you'll have an investigational product group or a placebo group. You'll have a washout period, and then they cross over where the group that was on the investigational product crosses over to placebo and vice versa. So a clinical trials checklist that you should have, when you're talking to a CRO would be that your protocol should be written to ICH guidelines. You've identified your claim, so what endpoints, what should you look for? You should look for suitable surrogate markers, questionnaires, endpoints that should indicate improvement in clinical signs. The right endpoint is not always obvious, so that's why you really need to work with good researchers and a good research partner that's experienced in designing dietary supplement trials. Your target population, you need to make sure that it's identifiable and selected to minimize confounding factors. So randomized clinical trial you need to have an appropriate placebo group for your product as well. The sample size should be calculated at the outset to make sure that you're going to have enough in each group to show significance. The length of the study is important. It should be sufficient to move the endpoints and reflect notable clinical changes. The safety markers are very important, and they have to be done at the beginning and at appropriate times in the study and at the end. And the statistical analysis, you always should write a statistical plan into your protocol right at the outset that says exactly what you're going to analyze at the end of the study, including subgroup analysis and exploratory endpoints if you have them.
Let me ask you, Najla, how have the markers used in clinical trials, have they evolved much over the 20 years? Has either medical technology or devices that you can use in a cost-effective manner, have they become improved so you can actually perform better over time, or has there not been much change in what markers that you have to choose from, basically?
There hasn't been a lot of markers a lot of new markers or a lot of good markers for our industry. A lot of the design, a lot of the markers that are available have been developed for the pharma model, which is quite different, from the dietary supplement or the evidence-based nutrition model. So we're in desperate need of that, and we need to come together as an industry and as researchers and work on having better markers for health and not for disease to be able to address some of these endpoints. We have some, and there aren't a lot that are approved by the FDA, and we've been speaking to some of the people at the FDA about that. And about what it would take to develop some and recommend some that would be accepted by them as we advance in clinical research.
So, examples being like vision or intestinal flora or bone density, or those. Bone density obviously is one that's been used a lot, but
right.
Some of these sort of quality of life and, or as you say, wellness issues as opposed to disease issues. That's kind of the
correct.
Here. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, correct. Exactly. So. Moving on to the final report, at the end of the study, that's what you've got. That's what you've paid for. Just the conduct of the study is, let's say, it's gone well, and it's you've gotten your protocol approved. All of your population is recruited. The study is done. You have a final report that's going to showcase what we found in the study, and that final report should be written according to the Consort 2010 guidelines, and which should contain a discussion of subject disposition, the methods, all the results, any adverse events, and a well-written discussion that takes into account what is reported in the literature to explain your results. And it should also be able to be submitted as is to any regulatory body for substantiation of your claim. A robust discussion is very necessary. It should include mechanism of action and physiological and clinical relevance of the results. And a lot of times we find that, sponsors or clients, will come to us after the fact with studies that they've done, that they've just been given statistical reports for, which is a lot of numbers that tells them, yes, it's statistically significant or it's not, but doesn't really explain what the results mean. So I'm going to next go over some of the challenges that we have for clinical studies in the dietary supplement industry. So when regulators look at our study results, and Todd will speak into this more so than I will, they want to see a p-value less than 0.05 with type 1 error controls. So this statistical requirement for dietary supplement studies is heavily based on the pharma model. And the pharma model requires that in order to prove efficacy of the product. However, this is very challenging in our industry for two major reasons. And, the first being the limited size of our study population pool, which is still shrinking. We touched on that a little bit before, and Todd touched on that a little bit. So for structure function claims, we're only allowed to work with healthy populations. And, although there's valid ethical reasons why we do so, namely to limit harm resulting from delay of treatment for diseased individuals, many biomarkers are homeostatically controlled. So it's very challenging to move these biomarkers in healthy people. So it makes it difficult to prove significance in this scenario. So if it's a drug, for example, even in a drug circumstance, if it's a drug like Tylenol, it would be a challenge to show the capability of a painkiller on a population of healthy people with no pain. So it's a little absurd what the expectation is of our products in this industry. So, it's the most appropriate population to work with would be the preclinical or pre-disease population. And the normal standards of care for this population is to introduce lifestyle changes, such as exercise and diet changes. But now we're widening the definition of disease, which is leading to medication being prescribed earlier across the spectrum, and leads to at-risk people being included in this expanded definition of disease. So this makes it, harder for us. It narrows our pool of healthy participants that we can work with for our studies. The second reason is the evidence-based medicine concept, using that as a template for nutraceutical trials. Evidence-based concept was designed for drug trials, and drugs differ greatly from nutrients and how they influence certain study parameters. So evidence-based medicine and evidence-based nutrition are very different. For example, drugs work in isolated systemic function, whereas nutrients work in complex networks. Drugs target a single organ or tissue. Nutrients target all cells or tissues. Drugs are not homeostatically controlled, whereas nutrients are. Baseline status affects the response to intervention for nutrients, but it doesn't for drugs. There is a true placebo group for drugs because our bodies don't produce those compounds, whereas for nutrients we don't have a true placebo group because our bodies contain a basal level of a lot of these nutrients. And the effect size in drug trials are large, and in nutrient trials are small. And drugs are not essential to our bodies, nutrients are. And if we don't have these drugs, they don't result in disease, but if we don't have these nutrients, we can end up having diseases. The side effects of drugs is large, whereas it's small in nutrients. And, the biggest also here is that drugs are meant for therapeutic. They're meant after the fact, when you have a disease, when you have a condition. And these nutrients are preventative. So it makes it, quite challenging for us. And although the randomized controlled trials are the best study design to prove efficacy, the endpoints that are used in pharmaceutical studies are not always suitable for dietary supplement research. And as I mentioned earlier, there's no FDA-approved structure function endpoint. So we need desperately to work on these and develop some. So when we take a step back and go back to the purpose of the p-value, the original purpose of the p-value. And it wasn't meant to be the be-all and end-all that we have it be today. There's an interesting article by Nuzzo, which was published in Nature, which is a very high-profile journal, 2014, that highlights that the p-value was never meant to be used the way that it is used today, and that the current use of the p-value actually encourages muddle thinking. Statistical significance doesn't necessarily indicate practical relevance. So we should ask ourselves, how much of an effect is there, not is there an effect? And that's a shift in paradigm that I think we need to do going forward. Do you want to weigh in on any of this, Todd?
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Part of the problem is that in the United States is that we're wedded to the 95% confidence level, and as Najla pointed out, it was never meant to be. In fact, when you ask a biostatistician what that 95% confidence level is, they will admit to you that is not a treatment effect, which is very interesting. If it's not a treatment effect, then how did it become the gold standard of everything? All it was intended to do was to measure whether you could repeat that. All it means is that if you could repeat that trial, you have a 95% confidence level that you would repeat it. But then when you really start talking to statisticians, you've learned that really no clinical trial is really all that reproducible. So we're stuck on this paradigm of measuring everything against the 95% confidence level rather than taking a look and measuring against whether there's an actual treatment effect. So the FTC's caught on to this in the negative way is that if you have statistical significance, they'll then ask you whether that significance was clinically relevant. So 4 pounds of weight loss over a 90-day period compared to 2 pounds over a 90-day period for placebo, if you have enough people in that trial, you'll get statistical significance, but they would say it's not clinically relevant. What they don't want to hear is that just because you could have the opposite where you have a p-value of 0.85, but your treatment effect is double that of placebo, but the FTC doesn't want to hear about those. And it's a problem from a policy standpoint. It's a problem that we need to address. Otherwise, it's going to be continually hard for supplement companies and functional food companies be able to make meaningful claims for their products. Supplements are not meant to clobber things. Supplements are meant to address things that are issues that that you're at high normal, in the high normal range, or maybe slightly diseased range. Not intended to take, if I have runaway blood pressure at 190 and be able to bring it down to 140. A supplement just will not do that.
Exactly.
So you need drugs in those instances, but it really does have, it could have meaningful effect at 140 over 90, because you can bring it down just down to 130. The benefits, cardiovascular benefit, and your risk of stroke goes down dramatically. And that's what we should be concentrating on and looking at, rather than trying to fight over whether it's 95% confidence level, which really doesn't mean there was a treatment effect. I think it goes back to when you're trying to design your trial, what are you trying to show? And if you really want to show a treatment effect, it'd be, Grant, you asked earlier, well, is that 40 people or 50 people or 60 people or 90 people? Well, the fact of the matter is, without doing a appropriate power calculation, you do not know what that effect is. And if you just say, well, I just want to pay for 50 people, well, you're rolling the dice. That 50 people is enough.
Exactly.
I think that's the problem. But I can tell you the Federal Trade Commission does not think a 10-person study is robust enough, even if you get a p-value of 0.05. They're not going to think that is robust enough. They're going to say that is a pilot study, at best. And you can't make clinically proven claims. You can't think of how many ingredient suppliers out there make clinically proven claims on 10-people studies. It's just not enough for the Federal Trade Commission, and never will be.
Well, it's not enough scientifically either.
Yeah.
I mean, I know our industry has grown from that, but it's not enough scientifically. That's regardless of the results you see, that's a basis to base a larger study on.
We have a couple questions from the audience, if you guys don't mind addressing them. Great. Okay, so first one up is, can the group comment on the trend of large HMOs supporting Dr. RX and NX approach to preventative health care?
Take that?
We've given advice to some HMOs on that, and I think that from an HMO perspective, even a PPO or any insurance company, it would be cheaper to keep their people from getting sick in the first place, or if they are just very much slightly over a disease population, but we could modify their diet and add a supplement, it would bring down our health care costs significantly. The problem is, as with everything, everybody's looking for a magic bullet, and quite frankly, until Americans learn that they need to exercise, eat right, you can take all the supplement drugs in the world, we're just going to get sicker. But I think HMOs want to look at lower cost options to save money, and supplements is a good place to look at that. If you can keep somebody off of glucophage for another 10 years, that might be a good thing, and that might be achievable through appropriate supplementation.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think we definitely need to look at these products for prevention, and it would reduce healthcare costs in the future.
Well, and I would agree, and I think there has been a lack of comprehensive economic studies that illustrate the healthcare costs saved or prevented over history by supplementation in specific products. There's been some sponsored by national groups, and the Lewin Group did a couple studies, calcium and a couple others, but effectively, hundreds of thousands of cases of diseases have likely been prevented. But again, it's a burden of proof, right? How do you demonstrate that so many hip fractures have been prevented by calcium supplementation, as an example? So, but again, that's usually not companies. That's industry-funded studies rather than individual studies. So that's part of the challenge, is getting industry cooperation to demonstrate economic benefits. Then you get Medicare, you get HMOs, you get private insurers, insurance companies, and I think we need more momentum there. There's some momentum there, but obviously that's a big industry challenge going forward.
It's also a mindset within the country. You go back and you have conventional doctors say, well, that's only a 3% reduction in cancer rates or 3% reduction rate in heart disease. Well, okay, maybe that's not statistically significant. Okay, that's fine. However, 3%, that's 3 out of 100 people. When you start multiplying the numbers, and you start multiplying that out, the cost savings are significant.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
Again, we look at it from just this narrow tunnel vision that it all goes back, Grant, to we are stuck on the 95% confidence level, and if we can't get there, we want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And if one of my former associates are on the line, she's probably laughing her butt off about that comment. But anyway, it's where we are. We narrowly look at things and understand the bigger picture.
If you just look at heart disease, for example, so if you reduce total cholesterol by 10%, there's a 30% reduction in coronary heart disease. Heart disease is the number one killer in the United States. So what does that equate to for our products that help that in cost savings? Huge.
Those are the dots that need more connecting, I think we would
absolutely.
Okay, Mike, any more questions before our time's up? Go ahead, Mike.
We have more. I have more questions. Are there ongoing academic efforts that are ongoing to identify wellness, quality of life markers that are distinct from disease markers?
So are there academic efforts that we, the panel, or others know about to find these new markers that we were referring to?
Correct.
No, not that I'm aware of offhand. I know that we're working with some researchers in academia as well as in the government to try and come up with some wellness markers that would be accepted. I mean, there's lots working on wellness markers, but that would be accepted by our regulators. So as we design the trials, we can give value to our sponsors and clients looking to use these in their clinical trials going forward.
I mean, historically, arthritis is rate your pain 1 to 10 every day, right? Something like that. I mean, I've seen studies that refer to those. Is that pretty much? I mean, for pain, is that?
Yes.
There's no other way of doing it at this point, right?
Well, we're doing it for some diseases, but we need for some conditions, but we need to do it for others. So there's researchers in the U.S., Canada, and Europe that came together to develop that for arthritis and for respiratory disease. But basically, what we need is to have these markers where we can show a minimal response that's required to show improvement in the quality of life for other diseases other than these two. It's been done for some, but across the board we're lacking, I think, in a very big way in these markers.
Yeah.
But the question predisposes that the markers that we have are automatically indications of disease. But blood sugar, for instance, it is a measure of whether you're pre-diabetic or diabetic, but it's also a measure of how healthy you are generally. We know that keeping our blood sugar levels low, doesn't matter how old we are, whether we're pre-diabetic or not, is a good thing to keep your blood sugar on the lower side to help reduce the insulin rush. So, or CRP levels, looking at as inflammation. We all have inflammation going on all the time, but looking at CRP levels tells us how we should maintain our. And you can use CRP levels and triglyceride levels and things like that, and look at whether your cholesterol levels really are a problem. And then there's measures of cholesterol. There's big fluffy cholesterol, and there's little sticky cholesterol that get into your arteries. The big fraction we're not looking at those type of markers to actually look at whether whether cholesterol is an issue or not for the individual, whether inflammation is a problem. These are all things that are regulated by our body, and I'm not a scientist in any way, but I've learned more from integrative physicians than anything that you have to look at your body as a whole and not as an individual part. And unfortunately, our conventional medicine looks at it as an individual part.
Exactly. No, absolutely correct, Todd. The challenge, though, is looking at these markers are going to be in the normal range in a healthy population. So that's the challenge of being able to develop something for that population that's a measure of wellness and being able to see it move in a clinical trial.
Well, and I would assert the other side of the coin, of course, is that markers may be, too narrow a term. Obviously, if you're measuring pain, if you're measuring eye function, if you're measuring brain function, those are hardly ones you can, collect from blood levels or cellular activity, probably, right? Just have to be external tests, and those are generally recognized, but probably you need a larger volume of test subjects in a pretty regarded, whether it's brain test or eye test and that kind of stuff. Have you seen many of those?
Yes, we're doing
trials using that more subjective measures to be thrown out, or claims been challenged?
We use those a lot in our trials for cognitive health, for digestive health. There's a lot of questionnaire type of studies that we do. You're right, when it's subjective, we have to, usually the number per group is higher. Whether, as far as I know, as long as the study is done properly and you're using the right tools and you can demonstrate an effect, I don't think regulators, you can speak more into that, Todd, of how the regulators view that.
Regulators don't like anything. But it's probably easier to measure cognitive health than anything else because the battery of tests that you can do.
That's right.
And almost, whether we like it or not, we're going to have some type of decline as we get older. I mix my kids. I'm 53. I call my daughter my son's name, my son my daughter's name all the time. But you can actually measure those things, and so there are validated measures of tests that you can do to show that there's an increase in memory or increase in attention and focus. And those aren't negative. They're not Alzheimer's. They're not dementia. These are just normal part of aging. I mean, let's face it.
Those are validated questionnaires that you can use.
Yeah. If you're over 50, you have aches and pains. It's life.
All right, more questions, Mike. I know we exceeded our hour, but let's get through the questions people have submitted so they get their value here.
Right. Next one. Do you feel like the industry is prepared to support companies and ingredients that are willing to invest in an RCT? Once the investment is made in an RCT, can we prevent others from using borrowed science?
So IP issues, really.
IP. Well, there's two things. If you can't patent your particular use, then that makes it much more difficult. So then you got to make the choice of, do you publish your study or not? There's no requirement that you publish your study. Because if you publish your study, then you're right. Your competitor can come right behind you, take your product, and rip you off. There is a potential legislative fix here. And I've talked about this now for a good 8 or 9 years. We could amend DSHEA, to allow for stronger claims if you do a RCT on it, but you're the only one who gets that claim. And you can get exclusivity for 3 years if you go do it with that ingredient. So maybe somebody 3 years from now can copycat you, but they're going to have to wait 3 years before they could actually rip you off and be able to make the same claim. So there are some really inventive ways that we could consider doing this. And it would allow us to make stronger claims, like let's stop calling things joint discomfort or joint comfort. It's aches and pains related to joint health.
In Canada, you can make those kind of aggressive claims or more disease type of claims. You could say, reduce pain. You can say reduce cholesterol, as long as you have the data to back it up. But one of the ways I think you would get around that is to do your RCT on the final product, because that's your product, that's your formulation. So it would be hard for your competitor to copy that.
If you publish the study, though, they can rip it off. I get that question all the time, unfortunately, from clients. Yeah, X did a study and they published it. Can I rely on it? Is your product bioequivalent to that product? Yes, it is. Well, it's published. So they can. And that's, it's better to put something into a matrix. It makes it harder. And maybe if you get unexpected results, you can even patent it. But that's why I tell clients all the time, when you're considering publication, you have to consider whether the ingredients that are used in your product can be reverse engineered and whether you have any type of IP protections. If you don't have IP protection, that's one really good reason why you do not publish your study. And I would argue that to the Federal Trade Commission till the day I come home. Why am I going to give my competitors a study that I paid for?
Right.
But
yeah, you don't have IP protection.
Let's change the law. If you do the study, you can make the more aggressive claim.
So at this point, the consensus is do the study, but don't publish with details of your formula, obviously, but try and keep your IP protected, but do the study on your own unique formula that's either patented or protectable from a trade secret standpoint.
Right. If it's protectable from a patent perspective, then go ahead and publish. But make sure it is protectable from that perspective.
Okay, more questions, Mike?
Yeah, let's see if we can get through the rest of these. What's the definition of clinically relevant?
So, clinically relevant means that you've seen a difference over and above placebo, but it may not necessarily be statistically significant. So you've seen an improvement. So your placebo group got worse or without treatment, and your investigational product group got better, or the endpoint you're looking at remained the same, whereas the placebo got worse with no intervention. But that difference is not statistically significant for it to be, but it is clinically significant because it has an impact on prevention of disease and quality of life.
One article I read was, is it a meaningful effect to the patient themselves?
Yes.
So you go back to my easy example, is 4 pounds over 90 days meaningful over 2 pounds over 90 days? The FTC would say that's not clinically relevant, even if it's statistically significant. That's the easy one. I mean, 4 pounds versus 2 pounds, probably not meaningful or relevant. But you could do the reverse, and you could have the situation where it is relevant. A small reduction in, of blood pressure from 139 to 131 you may not get statistical significance, but it's definitely a meaningful drop in blood pressure. So it's relevant.
The same for lipids, the same for glucose. I mean, across the board, there's products that improve or prevent the disease from the preclinical state from becoming a disease, which is huge. But in the trial, it's not statistically significant. So, the regulators look at that and frown upon it and say that's not evidence. Well, that's not true. It has a huge impact on the progression of that population that patient from being in a pre-disease state to the disease state. So if someone is pre-diabetic and doesn't progress to being diabetic because they're on this product, and the placebo group progresses or gets worse, then that's a huge clinically significant result. And it may not be statistically significant because the numbers aren't large enough and our group size isn't large enough.
Okay, next question, Mike.
Do supplement studies require registration on clinicaltrials.gov?
No studies absolutely requires registration on clinicaltrials.gov. That's a decision that the sponsor needs to make. And what you need to take into consideration before you make that decision is that there are some journals that will not publish your study if it's not registered on clinicaltrials.gov. So, and there are journals that will. So it will depend on the type of journal and on the journal that you plan to publish your study is, and if you plan to publish your study.
Yeah, I also believe some IRBs require it to be listed as well.
I haven't come across that, that it's a requirement. It usually has to do with the publication. There may be, Todd, but I haven't come across any to date.
Some of the university IRBs are making them register it.
Okay, yeah, we use mainly central IRBs, not university ones, so maybe, yeah.
Okay, we have 2 left. Is there an independent body or association, other than the peer review in place in some journals, that currently provides some kind of independent, non-commercial stamp of approval that the clinical study was properly designed and conducted?
Third-party verification.
No.
No. I know.
But there be.
The closest you have is Health Canada.
Yes.
Another proposal I had is that you could, as part of amending the law, you could also submit your protocol to FDA for their approval. They already do this on medical devices and 510K applications. They will review your protocol for $2,000 and make suggestions on how you change it to meet what they believe is a well-controlled clinical study. You have to pay for that privilege, but we have found that it's been very useful for our clients in the medical device arena.
You pay for that, for your protocol to go through an IRB as well. So,
yeah.
If you can pay for that at that level, that would be fine too.
Okay. So last question I have here is, NCN willing to create a separate fund, Science Approaches, to identify and develop meaningful quality of life markers?
Yes.
It's a question for you, Grant.
Yeah.
It depends what happens to my last 2 investments. Yeah. So, I think collective industry efforts to make these things happen. I think, Tom's an independent consultant, one of my partners in NCN, but he spends a lot of time on behalf of getting the trade associations together in a dialogue to support collective, mostly, messaging and advertising to impact the media, or quick response capabilities amongst the companies to respond to negative media, that kind of stuff. Now, on the science side, yeah, I think, like I mentioned, economic research needs investing in. I think there needs to be an effort to get funds contributed by the major companies that benefit to help this stuff happen. So I don't think NCN itself is going to lead that, but obviously us and our partners and our others in the network, that's the kind of thing we should be doing. So we're all
strong advocates.
Add it to the list, yeah. So good. We thank you all for attending. We thank Todd and Najla particularly for their input. We invite you all to come to our meeting the day before, Supplied Side West, as well as the November 3rd meeting as alluded to. Some of Todd's colleagues are also presenting a workshop, and Najla will be there at Supply Side, as well as Venable and KGK on display, as well as a number of other companies. So we urge your involvement in all our events going forward. Mike will send a follow-up email with the contact information of both Najla and Todd and their firm, as well as Tom's State of the Industry presentation from the summit. And I think he said Robert Craven's. I think he's happy to share those on behalf of the summit to get more people involved there. So Mike will follow up with that. And any questions that amount from this day, certainly follow up with those by email to the group or to the specific contact. So we're happy to have held this event.
Thank you. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
All right.